So far in this unit, we have focused on systems where energy originates from sunlight. First, in coral reefs and then in the open ocean. In both cases, primary production in the surface ocean ultimately supports life throughout the system. Today, we move into the deep ocean, where that assumption no longer holds. Below the depth of light penetration, photosynthesis is no longer possible. Yet, life persists, often in surprising abundance. This lecture will focus on how life is supported in the deep sea, how energy reaches these environments, and how hydrothermal vent systems represent an entirely different pathway for sustaining biological communities. The deep sea begins below the depth where sunlight can support photosynthesis, typically around 200 meters, although this boundary varies depending on water clarity. Below this depth, the environment changes dramatically in ways that strongly influence biological processes. One of the most significant changes is the absence of light. Without light, there is no photosynthesis, which means that primary production does not occur locally in most of the deep ocean. As a result, deep sea ecosystems must rely on external sources of energy. Temperature is also much lower in the deep ocean, often near around 2 to 4 degrees Celsius. These low temperatures slow metabolic processes and influence the rates of biological activity. Pressure increases by approximately 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters of depth, meaning that organisms in deep ocean experience hundreds of times the pressure found at the surface. This pressure affects how molecules behave, including protein structure and membrane fluidity, meaning that life at depth requires biochemical adaptations to maintain normal cellular function. Despite these extreme conditions, the deep ocean is relatively stable compared to surface environments. There are no day-night cycles, seasonal temperature changes are minimal, and physical disturbances are relatively rare. This combination of stability and energy limitation defines much of the deep sea environment. Because photosynthesis does not occur in the deep ocean, life must depend on energy produced elsewhere or through alternative pathways. The primary source of energy for most deep sea ecosystems is the biological pump, which we discussed in the previous lecture. Organic material produced in the surface ocean through phytoplankton photosynthesis sinks through the water column as marine snow, fecal pellets, and dead organisms. This material carries energy and carbon from the surface to deep waters. As these particles sink, they are gradually consumed and decomposed, so the amount of energy reaching the deep ocean decreases with depth. This means that deep sea environments are typically energy limited with relatively low food availability. However, in certain regions, such as hydrothermal vents and cold seeps, energy is supplied through chemosynthesis, where microorganisms use chemical energy instead of sunlight to produce organic matter. So deep sea ecosystems can be broadly divided into those supported by surface-derived organic material and those supported by chemical energy sources. To fully understand deep sea ecosystems, we need to revisit the biological pump in more detail, because it is the primary mechanism linking surface productivity to life at depth. Phytoplankton in the surface ocean convert inorganic carbon into organic matter. This material enters the food web and is transferred through trophic levels. Some of it is respired back into carbon dioxide, but a fraction becomes part of particles that sink through the water column. As these particles descend, they are intercepted by organisms and decomposed by bacteria. This means that the flux of organic material decreases with depth. By the time material reaches the deep sea floor, only a fraction of the original surface production remains. This creates a gradient of energy availability with higher energy in shallower depths and progressively lower energy in deeper regions. The biological pump therefore controls not only carbon cycling, but also the distribution and abundance of life in the deep ocean. Areas with higher surface productivity tend to support more abundant deep sea communities. This diagram illustrates the central role marine snow has in the ocean carbon cycle. Please pause the video here and take a few minutes to review this simplified version of the process. If you are struggling to understand any part of this illustration, then I encourage you to reach out to me for additional help or review a few of the previous lectures we have covered in this unit. Organisms living in the deep sea must cope with conditions that are very different from those at the surface. One of the most important challenges is limited energy availability. Because food is scarce, many deep sea organisms have evolved slow metabolic rates. This reduces their energy requirements and allows them to survive on limited resources. Growth and reproduction are also often slow, reflecting the limited energy available to support these processes. Many organisms are adapted to take advantage of infrequent feeding opportunities, consuming large meals when available and surviving long periods between feeding events. Pressure is another major factor. High pressure influences biological systems at the molecular level by compressing proteins and cell membranes, which can disrupt normal cellular processes. One key effect is on membrane fluidity. As pressure increases, lipid molecules are forced closer together, making membranes more rigid and less permeable. This can interfere with processes such as transport of nutrients and waste, as well as proper function of membrane-bound proteins. Deep-sea organisms compensate by modifying the composition of their cell membranes. For example, they often incorporate a higher proportion of unsaturated fatty acids, which contain double bonds that introduce bends in the lipid tails. These bends prevent tight packing of lipids, helping maintain membrane fluidity even under high pressure. In addition, proteins in deep-sea organisms are adapted to remain stable and functional under compression, often through subtle changes in structure that prevent pressure-induced distortion. These adaptations are essential because organisms brought rapidly to the surface frequently cannot survive the sudden decrease in pressure, which can cause cellular structures to lose integrity and function. Organisms that regularly move between shallow and deep water, such as diving whales or even the leatherback sea turtle, must tolerate rapid pressure changes rather than constant high pressure. They rely on physiological strategies such as flexible lungs that collapse safely at depth and the absence of air-filled cavities, which reduces the risk of pressure-related damage during deep dives. Many deep-sea organisms exhibit adaptations to darkness, such as enhanced sensory systems or bioluminescence. These adaptations help them locate prey, avoid predators, and communicate in a lightless environment. These characteristics reflect the fundamental constraint of the deep sea, energy limitation under extreme physical conditions. In the absence of sunlight, many deep-sea organisms have evolved the ability to produce their own light through a process known as bioluminescence. This involves chemical reactions that produce light without significant heat. The basic mechanism involves a molecule called luciferin reacting with oxygen, and it's catalyzed by an enzyme called luciferase. This reaction releases energy in the form of light. Bioluminescence serves several important functions. It can be used to attract prey, as seen in organisms like the anglerfish, which use light-producing structures to lure food closer to it. It can also be used for communication, allowing organisms to signal to others in a dark environment. In some cases, it functions as a defense mechanism, either by startling predators or producing light that confuses them. In a lightless environment, the ability to produce light provides a significant advantage and has evolved independently in many different groups of organisms. Hydrothermal vents are found along mid-ocean ridges where tectonic activity allows seawater to circulate through the ocean crust. As water moves through the crust, it is heated by underlying magma and becomes enriched with dissolved minerals. You may remember we talked about that a little in Unit 1. When this heated, mineral-rich water is expelled back into the ocean, it forms hydrothermal vent systems. These fluids can reach very high temperatures and can contain reduced chemical compounds such as hydrogen sulfide. The mixing of these hot fluids with cold seawater creates steep gradients in temperature and chemistry, resulting in highly dynamic environments. Despite these extreme conditions, hydrothermal vents support dense and diverse biological communities. These ecosystems are fundamentally different from most marine environments because they do not rely on sunlight as their primary energy source. At hydrothermal vents, primary production is driven by chemosynthesis rather than photosynthesis. Chemosynthetic bacteria use chemical energy stored in compounds such as hydrogen sulfide to produce organic matter. To understand this, it helps to think back to photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, organisms use light energy to drive reactions that convert carbon dioxide into organic molecules. In chemosynthesis, the goal is the same, to fix carbon and build organic matter. But the energy source is completely different. Instead of light, chemosynthetic bacteria obtain energy by oxidizing reduced chemical compounds, such as hydrogen sulfide, which is abundant in hydrothermal vent fluids. When these compounds react with oxygen or other oxidants, energy is released. The bacteria capture this energy and use it to convert carbon dioxide into organic molecules. This process is fundamentally a chemical energy conversion pathway where the energy stored in organic molecules is transformed into biological energy that can support life. Importantly, this allows primary production to occur in complete darkness, independent of sunlight. These bacteria form the base of the food web at hydrothermal vents. Some live freely in the water or on surfaces, while others exist in close symbiotic relationships with larger organisms, such as tube worms. In these symbiosis, the host provides access to chemical substrates and oxygen, while the bacteria provide organic nutrients. So chemosynthesis demonstrates a critical concept. Life does not require sunlight as long as there is a usable energy source. This expands our understanding of where life can exist and shows that biological systems can be built on entirely different energy foundations than those we see at the ocean surface. Hydrothermal vent communities are characterized by high biomass and unique species adapted to extreme conditions. Despite the harsh environment, these systems can support dense populations of organisms. Many vent organisms rely on symbiotic relationships with chemosynthetic bacteria. For example, tube worms house bacteria within their tissues, providing them with access to chemical substrates while receiving organic nutrients in return. These communities are often transient, as vent activity can change over time. New vents can form, and existing ones can become inactive, leading to cycles of colonization and secession. This dynamic nature, combined with the resilience on chemical energy, makes hydrothermal vent ecosystems distinct from most other marine environments. The deep ocean is best understood as an integrated system where biological processes are tightly linked to physical and chemical conditions. Most deep-sea ecosystems depend on energy transported from the surface through the biological pump. At the same time, localized systems, such as hydrothermal vents, demonstrate that alternative energy pathways can support life independently of sunlight. The availability of energy, whether from sinking organic material or chemical reactions, controls the structure and function of deep-sea ecosystems. Because energy is limited, organisms must be highly efficient and adapted to their environment. These systems are also connected to broader ocean processes, including circulation, carbon cycling, and nutrient distribution. Understanding the deep sea requires integrating concepts from across oceanography, including physics, chemistry, and biology. Over the course of the semester, what we have been building is not just a collection of topics, but a way of understanding how the ocean functions as a system. We began with the physical structure of the Earth and the ocean basins, and then moved into the properties of water and ocean chemistry. From there, we examined how the atmosphere and ocean interact to drive circulation, waves, and currents. These physical processes set the stage for everything else that happens in the ocean. We then explored how life operates within this system, how primary production captures energy, how nutrients regulate that production, how plankton communities respond to environmental conditions, and how energy moves through the food webs. Finally, we examined how these processes play out in different environments, from coral reefs to the open ocean to the deep sea, each shaped by the same underlying principles, but expressed in different ways. What should stand out is that nothing in the ocean operates in isolation. Physical processes influence chemistry. Chemistry controls biological activity, and biological activity feeds back into the physical and chemical structure of the ocean. And importantly, small changes in one part of the system, whether it's temperature, circulation, nutrient input, can scale up to produce large changes in the ecosystems. So the goal is not just to remember individual concepts, but to understand the ocean as a connected, dynamic system, one where processes operate across scales and where understanding those connections allows you to interpret what you observe in the field and beyond. Before we finish, I want to step back and remind you of what all of this actually means beyond the classroom. The ocean covers about 72% of the surface of our planet. And it's not just something out there, it is fundamental to how this planet functions. A significant portion of the oxygen that you are breathing right now was produced by marine primary producers, especially the phytoplankton in the surface ocean. When we talk about ocean processes, we are talking about systems that directly support life on Earth. What we have studied this semester, circulation, chemistry, productivity, ecosystems, these are not abstract concepts. These are the processes that regulate climate, sustain food webs, and ultimately make the planet habitable. There's also a place for this knowledge beyond the course. Marine science is not a narrow field. It spans biology, ecology, chemistry, geology, engineering, technology, conservation, and even policy. Whether your interests are in field research, restoration, data science, environmental management, or engineering solutions, there are real and growing opportunities to contribute to how we understand and interact with the ocean. And even if you do not pursue a career in marine science, what I hope you take with you is a way of seeing the ocean differently. You now understand that it is a connected system and that it is sensitive to change. That understanding carries responsibility. We need people who are informed, who can explain these systems clearly, and who are willing to advocate for clean oceans and healthy marine ecosystems. Because ultimately, a healthy ocean is one of our best chances for long-term sustainability on the planet. So whether you go into this field or not, I hope you leave this class as someone who understands and respects the importance of the ocean. I hope each of you will be a voice for healthy oceans. I also hope you enjoyed the course and learning topics that I am passionate about.